Got a warrant? That was the line that froze Margaret Simmons. Our HOA president, Queen of Pearls, clipboard clutched like a royal scepter, right in the middle of my cabin living room. The cold mountain air poured through the busted door she had just ordered open, wood splinters scattered across my rug like confetti after a parade. And there she was, acting like she owned the place, until my weekend guest stepped out of the shadows. I wish I could tell you I was surprised, but this was peak Margaret. The woman thrived on other people's business. If she wasn't writing violation letters, she was patrolling the neighborhood like it was her personal kingdom. I'd seen her measure my lawn with a tape measure, inspect my trash cans for odor leakage, and once, I swear to you, she photographed my mailbox from 3 angles just to make sure it wasn't tilted. So, when she started hinting that my cabin, a property outside the subdivision, mind you, was within the HOA's sphere of influence, I should have known she'd try something. It started with the letters. 2 weeks before this so-called inspection, I got a bright yellow envelope taped to my front porch. Notice of non-compliance, unapproved structure. That was rich, considering my cabin had been standing for 20 years, long before Margaret's iron-fisted HOA presidency. At the next board meeting, I brought it up, politely, mind you. Margaret, the HOA has no jurisdiction over my cabin, I said. She just smiled, pearls catching the fluorescent light like shark teeth, and told me she'd look into it, which in Margaret speak means expect trouble. Now, I don't usually take threats seriously, but Margaret had a way of making small problems balloon into full-blown wars. A grill left on the porch, $100 fine, kids chalking on the sidewalk, graffiti violation. If she thought she could stake her claim on my cabin, I knew she wouldn't let it go. That's why, when I invited my old buddy Frank, retired sheriff, 30 years on the force, to spend the weekend up at the cabin, I jokingly told him, "You might end up deputized into the HOA wars." Turns out, it wasn't much of a joke. The night of the break-in, I was in the back room unpacking groceries when I heard the unmistakable sound of wood cracking. At first, I thought it was a tree branch snapping in the wind, but then came the heavy thud of boots, the swish of winter coats, and Margaret's clipped voice barking orders like she was running a raid. "Check the windows. This place is not up to code." I stepped out into the living room just as the doorframe gave way. The smell of splintered pine hit my nose, sharp and raw. Margaret swept in like a storm, clipboard tucked under her arm, flashlight beam cutting across my walls. 2 HOA board members trailed behind her, one of them holding a crowbar like it was the most natural thing in the world. "This is a violation," Margaret announced as if she'd just discovered a meth lab. "Unapproved structure, unsafe premises. I am within my rights as president to conduct an emergency compliance check." "Your rights," I said, still clutching a bag of bread. "This is private property." That's when Frank stepped forward from the recliner where he'd been quietly sipping coffee like he was waiting for the evening show to start. His voice was calm, almost amused. "Got a warrant?" The room shifted. Margaret's pearls rattled against each other as her head snapped toward him. For a second, she didn't recognize him. Then her face tightened when she saw the badge glinting faintly from the leather wallet he held up just enough for her to see. "Retired sheriff," Frank said, leaning back in the chair like he had all night. "But I still know the law better than you do, and right now, ma'am, you're trespassing." The silence was thick. You could hear the wind whistling through the busted door frame. The board members looked at each other, suddenly less confident about their midnight adventure. But Margaret, oh, Margaret, she doubled down. "This entire neighborhood falls under HOA oversight," she snapped. "That includes adjacent properties that could pose risks to our residents. We've had complaints." "Complaints?" I laughed. "The only people who come up here are deer and squirrels. Unless they filed a report, I think you're reaching." Frank stood now, his height making the board members instinctively step back. His voice was even, no need to raise it. "Breaking and entering without permission is a crime. Doesn't matter if you're HOA president, governor, or Queen of England. You want authority here, you call the sheriff's office and you get a warrant. Otherwise, you walk back out that busted door." Margaret's jaw worked like she was grinding gravel. She looked around the cabin, eyes darting between the cracked door, my security camera blinking red in the corner, and Frank's steady stare. The clipboard shook slightly in her hand, but she masked it by scribbling something furiously. "This isn't over," she hissed, snapping her pen closed. "You'll be hearing from the board." Frank smirked, sitting back down. "And you'll be hearing from me." She turned sharply, motioning for the others to follow. Their boots crunched across the broken wood as they retreated into the cold night, the glow of their flashlights bobbing away down the path. I stood there, heart hammering, staring at the jagged hole where my door used to be. Frank took another sip of his coffee, as calm as ever. "Told you," he said. "HOA wars." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The war had officially begun, and something told me Margaret wasn't the type to back down quietly. If anything, tonight's humiliation would only make her more dangerous. And I was right. Because the next morning, Margaret called an emergency HOA board meeting. "Got a warrant?" That one question split the night in half. Frank didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The weight of those 3 words hit Margaret harder than a gavel slamming down in court. Her smug expression froze mid-smirk, pearls trembling against her collarbone as if they knew the game had just shifted. I stood there, caught between disbelief and the kind of nervous laughter you choke back when a cop pulls you over and asks if you know how fast you were going. Margaret had stormed into my cabin like she was leading a SWAT team, clipboard at the ready, bylaws on her lips. But she hadn't planned for Frank. Nobody ever plans for Frank. The flashlight beam swung across her face, harsh and unflattering, catching every line of indignation. Behind her, 2 HOA board members shuffled uncomfortably, like kids who'd followed the wrong ringleader into trouble. Outside, the wind whistled through the cracked doorframe, and with it came the faint sound of voices. Neighbors stirred awake by the shouting. Margaret, of course, tried to recover. "This is an HOA matter," she snapped, words clicking sharp and metallic. "We have full jurisdiction over neighborhood structures and this," she gestured broadly at my cabin like it was a nuclear waste site, "falls under emergency inspection protocols." Frank stepped forward, slow, steady, the kind of movement that commands a room without trying. He didn't even flash his badge, just let it glint faintly in his half-open wallet. "Ma'am," he said, his voice smooth as gravel rolling down a river. "HOA bylaws are not law. You've just broken into private property. That's breaking and entering." You could hear a pin drop. The board members froze. Margaret's pen slipped against her clipboard with a squeak. She looked around, searching for backup, but all she had were 2 deer-in-headlights accomplices and a growing audience outside. The neighbors were gathering now. Porch lights blinked on one by one down the road, like stage lights for the drama. People stepped into the cold night in slippers and coats, whispering, craning their necks toward my cabin. Some pulled out phones. Nothing travels faster than HOA gossip, except maybe HOA drama caught on camera. Margaret doubled down, because of course she did. "We've received complaints," she declared, clutching her clipboard like it could shield her from Frank's calm stare. "Unpermitted gatherings, unsafe structures. Our bylaws clearly state—" Frank cut her off, not unkindly, but firmly. "Your bylaws apply to members' conduct within HOA boundaries. This cabin isn't in your HOA's jurisdiction. Even if it were, you don't have the right to force entry. You can fine people, sure. You can nag about fences and lawn height, but you can't break down doors." The crowd outside was swelling now, murmurs rising. Someone muttered, "She broke into his cabin?" Another voice hissed, "That's illegal, isn't it?" I watched Margaret's shoulders stiffen as her audience shifted from supportive to skeptical. I spoke up then, because sometimes silence isn't enough. "Margaret, I told you last week at the meeting, this cabin is not under your HOA. You waved me off. Now you've dragged half the board up here in the middle of the night to prove a point. Was the clipboard not heavy enough? You had to break my door too?" Laughter rippled from the onlookers, low but audible. Margaret's eyes flashed, and for the first time, I saw something crack beneath the pearl-clad armor. "This is harassment," she snapped, turning toward the crowd. "Do you want unsafe, unregulated structures in your neighborhood? Do you want lawlessness?" Frank didn't miss a beat. Funny. I thought lawlessness was breaking into someone's home without permission. That line hit like a hammer. The neighbors gasped. A few even chuckled. The board members with her suddenly found the ground fascinating, their loyalty evaporating into the night air. And that's when the standoff boiled over. One of the neighbors shouted, "You're trespassing, Margaret." Another yelled, "He's got it on camera, too." I looked up at the blinking red light of my security cam, still rolling. Every second was being captured. Evidence. Margaret's face turned crimson, but she pressed forward anyway, pearls rattling as she tried to steady her breath. "We're leaving," she barked at her board members as if she was the one making the choice. "This situation will be reviewed by the HOA at the emergency meeting tomorrow." Frank leaned back, casual as if he'd just won a hand of poker. "I'll be sure to attend," he said. "Might even bring a copy of the state trespassing statute. Could make for some good bedtime reading." The crowd laughed again, louder this time. Margaret spun on her heel, heels crunching against the gravel as she stormed out, her entourage scurrying behind her. The night air rushed in, sharp and cold, filling the silence she left behind. Neighbors lingered on the road, whispering, eyes wide like they'd just watched the season finale of their favorite show. Phones still glowed in the dark. I could practically hear the group chats exploding with play-by-play updates. Frank turned to me, poured himself the last of his coffee, and said it like it was nothing. "You're about to have the most attended HOA meeting of the year." I laughed, but my stomach tightened. He was right. Margaret wasn't retreating. She was regrouping. And if there's one thing more dangerous than Margaret with a clipboard, it's Margaret with wounded pride. The wind howled outside, rattling the broken door frame, and I couldn't shake the feeling that tonight's standoff had only been the opening round. Tomorrow, under fluorescent lights and Robert's Rules of Order, the real battle would begin. And Margaret wasn't going down without a fight. "This meeting is adjourned." Margaret's voice cracked as the gavel slipped in her hand and clattered against the table. Her pearls rattled with her shaking chest, and for the first time since I'd known her she looked less like a queen and more like a cornered animal. The board members beside her avoided my eyes, their chairs creaking as they leaned away from her. The whispers from the audience filled the fluorescent-lit room like buzzing bees. And just like that, the mighty HOA president had lost her crown. It was a moment I'd pictured before, imagined, really, but seeing it unfold in real time was better than any daydream. Margaret had built her reputation on control, precision, and fear. But tonight, she was unraveling. Right there in the multi-purpose room of the community center, under the blinking hum of those old ceiling lights. The day after the cabin break-in, word spread faster than wildfire. By breakfast, neighbors were texting me screenshots of group chats. "Did you hear Margaret broke into his cabin?" By noon, someone had already clipped the security footage I'd pulled from my camera and passed it around like popcorn at a movie theater. By the time the HOA announced the emergency meeting, it wasn't just board members planning to attend, it was half the neighborhood. I walked in with Frank at my side. He wore the same calm expression he'd had the night before, like none of this fazed him. The crowd parted slightly as we entered, heads turning, whispers trailing behind us. I could feel the heat of their eyes, curiosity mixed with schadenfreude. Everyone loves watching a tyrant stumble. Margaret sat at the head of the table, clipboard stacked with papers, pen clutched so tightly her knuckles were white. She smiled, but it was brittle, the kind of smile you plaster on when you know the cameras are rolling. Her allies, 2 longtime board members, sat stiffly beside her, but their body language betrayed them. No eye contact, no nods, just silence. She opened the meeting like nothing had happened. "We're here tonight to discuss urgent safety concerns," she began, her voice measured. "Specifically, the condition of the unpermitted structure on the edge of our neighborhood. That was my cue. I stood slowly, holding a small remote in my hand. The screen behind her flickered to life, and there it was. The grainy black-and-white footage of Margaret and her board members splintering my cabin door. The audio crackled through the speakers, her voice barking orders, the wood breaking. Frank's calm, devastating question. "Got a warrant?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone muttered, "Oh my God." Another whispered, "She really did it." Phones came out, recording the playback like they were watching a scandal unravel on live TV. Margaret tried to talk over it. "This footage is taken out of context." Frank stood, his badge still tucked in his wallet but visible enough. "Context doesn't change the fact that you forced entry into private property without consent. That's a crime." The room went silent. Margaret's pen snapped in her hand. The board members shifted in their seats, one clearing his throat but saying nothing. Their loyalty evaporated under the fluorescent glare. I added, "And just for clarity, my cabin isn't even under HOA jurisdiction. I confirmed that with the county last year when you tried to cite me for putting up a fire pit." Margaret's smile twitched. "The HOA has responsibility for community safety," she said, voice rising. "When structures pose a risk—" "Risk?" a neighbor in the back shouted. "The only risk out there is you busting down doors." Laughter erupted, scattered at first, then louder. Margaret slammed her gavel, demanding order, but it only underscored her unraveling authority. The once intimidating gavel now looked like a child's toy in her grip. Her allies tried to salvage it. One cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should table this matter until—" "No," another voice cut in. This time it was Linda, a neighbor who had been one of Margaret's staunchest defenders. "You've gone too far. We all saw it. You don't represent us anymore." The air shifted. It was subtle but undeniable. The crowd wasn't afraid anymore. They weren't cowed by Margaret's clipboard or fines. They were emboldened, voices rising, murmurs growing into a chorus of dissent. Margaret's pearls rattled as she tried to speak, but her voice cracked, drowned out by the crowd. She slammed the gavel again, but the sound was swallowed by the buzz of voices. Even her board members leaned back, arms crossed, refusing to back her up. And then came the final blow. Frank leaned toward the microphone, his voice low, calm, and clear. "If this board doesn't take action tonight, the sheriff's department will. I'll personally see to it." The room exploded, not in chaos, but in release. Applause, laughter, murmurs of agreement. Margaret froze, face pale, pearls trembling, then shoved her papers into a pile. "This meeting is adjourned," she barked, gavel clattering against the table. And with that, she stormed out, heels clicking against the tile, her pearls the last sound fading as the door slammed behind her. I stood there, watching her retreat, adrenaline still humming through me. Victory tasted sweet, but I knew Margaret too well. She wasn't gone. Not yet. Pride like hers doesn't dissolve in one night. It festers, it plots, it finds another angle. Frank leaned close, muttering just for me. "You just knocked her down. Be ready. She's not done swinging." And he was right. Because as the neighbors gathered around me, cheering, buzzing, already gossiping about Margaret's downfall, I caught sight of her allies whispering in the corner, their faces tight with calculation. The HOA had retreated tonight. But a wounded Margaret? That was a storm still brewing.